Hello again, and thank you for joining us in the Providence College Podcast. I'm Charlie Joyce, your host today. Our producer is Chris Judge of the class of 2005. Our two guests today have strong ties to the San Miguel School in Providence. The school is a Lasallian middle school for boys in grades 5 to 8 from underserved populations. Providence College has enjoyed a long association with the school. Here with us are Brother Lawrence Goyette, a De La Salle Christian brother who is a graduate of the PC class of 1972, and Francisco Vera Nicola, a member of the PC class of 2020. Brother Lawrence joins us by phone from New Jersey, while Francisco is here with us in the studio. Brother Lawrence Goyette was recently named auxiliary visitor of the De La Salle Christian Brothers Schools District of Eastern North America. He previously served as director of the Christian Brothers community at Manhattan College in the Bronx. Brother Lawrence is the founder of the San Miguel School Educational Model and Movement, which began when he established the first school in Providence in 1993. He has been a Christian brother for more than 50 years and has received 3 honorary doctoral degrees, including one from Providence College in 2007. Francisco Vera Nicola is a sociology major and a Latin American Studies minor at PC. He's a resident of Central Falls and a graduate of the San Miguel School in Providence and of nearby La Salle Academy. Francisco is a student worker in the college's Feinstein Institute for Public Service. Welcome to the Providence College Podcast, Brother Lawrence and Francisco.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Brother Lawrence, you've moved into a new role with the Christian Brothers in Eastern North America. What exactly is an auxiliary visitor?
So that's a really great question, Charlie. It's, most people, I think, who are even slightly familiar with religious communities of men and women, the term is more like a provincial. You're in charge of a certain region of, in this case, it would be brothers. But going back in our history, when the De La Salle Christian Brothers were founded over 300 years ago in France, our founder, St. John Baptist de La Salle, thought that one of the most important parts of the provincial job would be visiting the brothers. In that case, it was throughout France. And so the term kind of stuck, I guess, over those several hundred years of the brother visitor. Now, in the sense of auxiliary visitor, it's basically I'm one of 2 brothers who assists the provincial, or in our case, the brother visitor. So an auxiliary visitor would be like an assistant provincial. And a big part of my job is being on the road, visiting not only communities and brothers, but also a lot of our ministries along the East Coast.
When you say visiting the brothers, brother, are they in particular communities? Are some of them maybe in nursing facilities? What is the context for the visits?
Yeah, well, it really it kind of runs the gamut. So we have small communities. For example, the community that I would be familiar with in Providence right now is the Brother Charles Henry community in North Providence. And there are 3 brothers, and there are 2 Lasallian volunteers who live there. 2 of the 3 brothers work at La Salle Academy. The 2 Lasallian volunteers work at the San Miguel School. So that's sort of a new model of community with lay partners and brothers. But then you go to Narragansett, not too far away from Providence. You have a much larger community of about 20 brothers, many of whom are retired, with one young man who's living there who's considering joining the brothers. And if you're not retired down there, generally speaking, the ministry would be serving at Ocean Tides, which is a special program for court-adjudicated kids. So in Rhode Island, there are 5 Lasallian ministries, 2 communities, but that kind of mimics the rest of the East Coast, New York City, Albany area, Toronto, Detroit, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and places like that.
Primarily the Eastern Seaboard, I guess, where you visit. You did reference travel.
That's right. That's what's called our district. Again, the usual terminology is a province, but we use the word district. So the United States is broken up into 3 districts: the West Coast, the Midwest, and the East Coast.
I see. Okay. Let's turn to the San Miguel School Network, brother. How many schools are there currently, and where are they most congregated?
Yeah, right now we have. It's funny because it's not. I can't easily say we have 12 schools. That's the number I'm going to give. We have 12 schools across the country, mostly in urban areas, because a couple of them have kind of morphed into something that's a little bit different than what their original foundation was about. But it's approximately 12 schools. Nearly all of them are middle schools. They're each one is unique. Each one has a particular flavor. A quite interesting one, I believe, is the one that's on Blackfeet Nation in Browning, Montana. So it's actually a Native American reservation. The poverty is extreme. The ministry there is absolutely amazing. It's not for everybody because it's in such a remote area, but most of the other schools are in the New York City area. As you said, Providence was the first one. New York City area, Chicago, San Francisco, St. Louis, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Washington D.C. Just to name a few of them. And I would say though the common denominator is that the schools were established to offer an alternative, a faith-based school as an alternative for families that maybe couldn't afford the typical private school education. So while every family pays something to attend, it's much more reasonable. It's much more, within what a typical family in an urban area could afford. So in Providence, for example, there's a sliding scale for tuition, but every family pays something to attend, And then after that, each school is kind of a mixture of kids. Some of them are coming from families where education is a top priority and are highly motivated kids. Some families, there might be some issues just in terms of struggles within the family, which then has an impact on the kids. And maybe they're behind academically or there are other issues that they're dealing with. So it's kind of a diverse population in each school, with the common denominator, though, coming from families that don't have enough money usually to attend a private school.
Well, as you know, we have one of those proud San Miguel graduates with us today, Francisco. Francisco, what was your experience like as a San Miguel student?
My experience at San Miguel was, I think I got very lucky because I had no idea what San Miguel was prior to going there. And it was through a friend who had an older brother that went to San Miguel. Our moms chatted about it, and then my mom thought it was a good idea because at the time I was going to school in Central Falls, and Central Falls doesn't have a very good public education system. So I was able to attend San Miguel, and like brother was saying, it's like a small school. It has 64 students. It has 4 grades, 5th through 8th. It's all boys. So, there's like a different kind of a change in the education system when you go from the public, my public Central Falls schools to the San Miguel kind of private school. So, but it was good overall. I think it kind of shaped me into the person I am today, and it gave me kind of respect for education and the desire to go to college, go to high school, things like that.
What were some of the most valuable lessons you think you learned, or maybe skills, when you were at San Miguel?
One of the first things you learn at San Miguel is actually you shake people's hands and you look them in the eye. And that's something that you practice from even before you enter 5th grade in something called readiness camp. You learn how to do that because you want to interact and you want to give someone the first impression. That's always important. That's one of the most important things that stuck with me throughout San Miguel. And the other thing is, I think the like I said, the importance of education and getting a holistic education. So it's not only being good at math, being good at reading, but also how you are as a person. What you care about, your values, things like that. So I think that's one of the things that San Miguel really instilled in me.
I'm sure it was a change of pace, a little bit of a transition for you. In what ways do you think you may have changed individually? Would it have been educationally, personally? Did it really change your way of looking at things?
Yeah, I think it really did, because one of the things that San Miguel does really well is you have a connection to the alumni that graduate from that school. and they always come back to visit. So you have students that went to LaSalle, to other private schools in the area, and they give you this kind of like sense of like a role model, and you have someone to look up to. So you're like, I also can achieve these things if I put my mind to it. So I think that's how it kind of changed me as a person, having some role model to look up to.
Brother Lawrence, how did your vision for a San Miguel school model actually develop?
Yeah, well, Charlie, I was, it seemed like a lot longer, but for 20 years before San Miguel started, I started as a classroom teacher in a school in Cranston, Rhode Island, where we had a few brothers back in the 70s. And then I decided in the late 70s to move to New York City, where we had a parish school in Queens, St. Gabriel's School, and we had about 8 Christian brothers in the school at the time and about 600 students. And so my first 10 years or so was as a teacher, and I think I grew as a teacher. I enjoyed the experiences a lot. Cranston is certainly very different from Queens, New York. At that school, I became the vice principal for a couple of years before I became the director of a brand new school in Brooklyn, which was similar to a San Miguel school, except that money was not as much of an issue. So it was a middle school for boys and girls. And so it just gave me another level of experience, I guess. And in 1988, I moved back to Rhode Island. And my career has been pretty much completely in middle schools. And at the time, we had no more middle school experiences, at least LaSallian ones, in the Providence area. So I ended up working for several years at St. Raymond's School, which is over by Miriam Hospital on the Providence-Pawtucket border. And at the time, St. Raymond's School, I loved it immensely, but it was a school that was struggling financially, and it kind of played out in its enrollment. So its last year of operation, which I think was 91, 92, the enrollment was drastically lower. There was one class that had 4 students, another one had 8. And so the handwriting was on the wall that the school wasn't going to make it, just couldn't survive. And part of the reason was because more and more families that were attracted to St. Raymond's were coming from pockets in that area where the average income was very low for the most part. And so I got to the point where I guess in 92 they decided they were going to close the school. And going hand in hand with that was the fact that I was living with a community of brothers in South Providence off Broad Street on Potters Avenue. And that's a struggling community. Even to this day, it still is. We had 5 brothers living in very simply in a very small house. And each day, the 5 of us would go off to different ministries, St. Raphael Academy, LaSalle Academy, Ocean Tides. I was going to St. Raymond's, and another brother was at Bishop McVinney School. And we were very, very much aware of the challenges in the neighborhood, with the quality of education, family struggles. And so that was going hand in hand with the fact that I was about ready to lose my job. And so because St. Raymond's was closing. So the timing was perfect. I went to my provincial at the time, Brother Michael McHenry, and said, rather than just get a job in another school, what's happening in the urban areas of Rhode Island, and it's still happening to this day, is that every year or two, another Catholic school closes in one of the urban areas, either Pawtucket, Central Falls, Providence, areas like that. And wouldn't it be great if we could start a brand new school, a very different type of model, where money was going to be important, obviously, but it would, San Miguel, I think to this day, still 5 or 6% of the income each year comes from tuition, which means over 90% comes from charitable donations and foundations, that type of thing. And so it was a struggle. I think, unrealistically, I thought to myself, we'll just start a new school. How hard can that be? It's like kind of a silly thing, but sometimes it's good that you don't really get the full, understanding of what you're entering until you're, right in the thick of things. So, but just to mention a couple of things I think that is so important at the very beginning. That first year, we had a school student body of 15 grades, and that was grades 5 and 6. I was the director of the school, and we had 2 first-year teachers, both of whom were LaSallian volunteers from Tennessee and Minnesota. And they took a chance. I mean, they agreed to be a part of this program that didn't exist yet. They were pioneers. And the other thing that was a blessing that first few years actually was being located in a Lutheran parish in South Providence, where they had a school for many years, but the school closed due to lack of funds. And so they not only welcomed us to their building, but they didn't charge us any rent for 10 years. And when I think back, that was an amazing gift, because I don't know if we'd be around today if we had to raise enough money in those early years to actually pay rent to a group. It was minimal salaries. It was just your basic, the budget that first year was $50,000. And we had a hard time raising that much money. When I left in 2014, after 20 years, our budget was up to $1.4 million. And we had a much bigger staff, well-developed programs, after-school programs, summer camps, graduate support, a much more sophisticated operation. But it was those first couple of years where we were blessed in having so many amazing gifts come our way. And some of the gifts were not necessarily in money. They were in space and in, the support of the LaSallian volunteers. So I think those two things were incredibly important. So the other thing I want to mention is that when we opened in 1993, the thinking was that there'd be one San Miguel school. The thinking wasn't deliberate attempt then to open a second school 2 years later in Chicago, another school 2 years later in Camden, New Jersey, et cetera, down the road. But Christian brothers and LaSallians around the world were looking for ways to return to our roots. So when St. John Baptist de La Salle started the first schools in France, basically it was for kids that education wasn't even a part of their conversation. It just wasn't possible because they were coming from such humble backgrounds. And so our goal, at that time, 300 years later, was to kind of return to that. So it wasn't just me looking at that in this country especially, but it was other brothers and LaSallians from other parts of the country were also looking for ways to kind of return to our roots. And that's what gave birth to the San Miguel movement. It started with one little school in Providence, and it just kind of grew across the country to the point now where, the oldest schools have been around 20, 25, 27 years.
That's a fascinating story. Do you have much interaction with the schools these days, brother?
I would say yes. I still keep in touch with a lot of the schools around the country. Of course, in our district, the District of Eastern North America, there are 4 San Miguel schools. Providence, of course, the first one, but then there's a school outside New York City in Freeport, Long Island, one in Washington, D.C., and one in Philadelphia. 3 of them are all boys. One of them is co-ed, because across the country, I'd say about half of them are co-ed. And Providence, the goal originally was that it'd be a co-ed school. That was my plan going into it. But because I involved the community, different groups in Providence, business community, church groups, educational programs, community centers, the year before it opened, one after another person said to me, you might want to consider this school to be all boys, because that's a definite need right now in Providence. And I went that route, and I think it was the best decision. It doesn't mean to say that girls couldn't benefit from something very similar, because, after about 10 years, I would almost call it a sister school. Sophia Academy opened in Providence for all girls, and basically the same type of thrust. But people in the community just felt that boys at that point needed something that was a little bit different than what the possibilities were at the time.
Wow. Well, what started as one school obviously really blossomed. You were the executive director at the San Miguel School in Providence for just over 20 years. Do you ever reflect back on the impact that you had on the school, brother?
Well, it's funny. People ask me that question a lot, and I just think, the 20 years I was at San Miguel, I've been going now about 6 years, but the 20 years that I was at San Miguel, I can honestly say were the most amazing years of my life. There's certainly a part of me that's still at San Miguel Providence, even though physically I'm not there. And it was, obviously you need somebody to kind of jumpstart something like this, but San Miguel is really one of the most amazing things is it's a very strong community. And Francisco touched on this a little bit when he was talking about what happens within the school each day. You know, the boys, he used that magic number, 64, which is still true to this day. You know, it's sort of 16 boys in 4 different grades, and it's a very tight-knit community. And it's the culture at San Miguel is a culture of caring and love. The boys call each other brothers. I mean, it's something that's really amazing. You know, anybody that gets a chance to visit San Miguel, you just have to be there for a half hour in the morning at the first part of the morning when they have the morning assembly, and you feel it immediately. It's something that's unlike anything that I've ever felt. But my thinking is the community is so much bigger than the 64 boys and 20 staff members who work there day to day. It's all of the donors and the board members and the mentors and the volunteers and the community leaders who are part of that school community. And it can't happen. The miracles that happen there cannot happen without that wider community. So it might be 64 boys, but then it's 64 families. It's like Francisco said, it's the alums that come back on a regular basis. It's the, 5 San Miguel students right now, alums of San Miguel, are working in several of the ministries in Rhode Island, Ocean Ties, LaSalle Academy, San Miguel. They're staff members. You know, they've come back to continue to help out. And I think it's something like this could never be the work of one person. It's like it takes a village to raise a child. And in this case, it's a LaSallian village. It's very dedicated to the LaSallian ideals of education and touching hearts and minds. And all those pieces are so important. And it's just, I can't imagine my heart not being in Providence, even though I might not be physically there. It's, and I'm still in touch with the director of the school, John Wolf. In fact, he called me yesterday just to give me some news. You know, once in a while he'll call and ask for advice. He'll give me, updates on what's happening. So I still feel like I'm a part of the community, even though I'm not there day to day. I don't get a chance to visit that often. But when I go back to visit, I was there in November. It's almost like I never left. It's a great feeling. It's a great group of people, really.
Francisco, you returned to San Miguel in 2016, and you worked 3 years as an intern in the Graduate Support Office. What brought you back there?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think I was, at least in that office, to a different capacity. I was kind of like the first graduate to come back and work there for a while, because if not, that role would be kind of mostly for the LaSallian volunteers, which, their work is a lot of, like the title says, voluntary, but they do get a stipend and all that kind of stuff. So I think I was graduating high school at LaSalle Academy. I was trying to figure out what to do. I've applied to different colleges. It's not that I didn't get in. I was just worried about the financial aid and things like that. And I had reached out to Manny Ortiz, who is a graduate of San Miguel, LaSalle Academy, and Providence College. And he was working at the time as the grad support director. So I reached out to him, and we talked it out. We were trying to see what the options were. We talked to the financial aid office here at PC. We were trying to figure things out. And eventually we just settled on, what about if I take a gap year after I finish high school, and I work part-time and also volunteer at San Miguel as like an intern, helping out wherever need be. So that's what basically happened. I was there in the graduate support office, mostly working with alumni. Whenever they would come back to visit, I would work with kind of like the data of how many students graduated, where did they end up, how many have a job, things like that. Just looking overall like how San Miguel is affecting these kids and how they turn out, and kind of putting into like, Excel and coming up with graphs and presenting that data to different people. So that was really influential. And then finally that following year, PC granted me the Martin Luther King Jr. Scholarship, so I was able to come here. And then I was able to continue my work at San Miguel with Manny Ortiz, but then it would later change to Irving Ogando, who's also a San Miguel graduate. and basically just working there, helping out, translating for parents whenever need be, helping out with this thing called ARC, which is Academic Resource Center for high school students that need help in their courses, because a lot of the students that graduate from San Miguel end up going to private institutions, and part of the kind of like the great thing about San Miguel is that they help you kind of pay for some part of the tuition at that school, at that high school. And one of the requirements is that if you have a low grade, you should come back to San Miguel and we can help you get that grade up. So that was part of my job, is helping them, like tutoring or helping them do their homework if it was just a matter of sitting down and doing it, because sometimes, their lives are kind of hectic and they don't sit down and do the homework. So it's a lot of different things that I was doing to that capacity, but that's essentially what brought me back to San Miguel, and then I stayed there for a while until I recently stopped just to focus on my senior year at Providence College so I could figure out what to do with my life afterwards. But it's been a wonderful ride.
Have any of your experiences, Francisco, as either a student or an intern carried over in any way to your PC education / experience?
I think the biggest thing I learned was just learning. So one thing I did learn from Manny Ortiz was Excel. He was like an Excel master, and I've used it several times in a lot of the classes. Having to like figure out shortcuts or just do simple tasks that I didn't know how to do before. And I didn't realize that I was going to learn those skills, but I walked away being like kind of a little bit decent at Excel anyway. I'm not going to say I'm an expert, but. And the other thing is just learning how to deal with or better communication skills with parents and with people older than me, because we had to communicate a lot with parents. We had meetings for financial aid with the parents of the graduates. And sometimes I would have to translate. I'd have to tell them difficult topics. I'd have to touch on financial topics that sometimes are touchy, things like that. And I think that's one skill that I will probably never forget, and I owe a lot to my experience as an intern.
Brother Lawrence, let's dig a little deeper now. You've been a Christian brother for 50 years plus. Is there any fascinating story as to how that vocation developed?
Well, that's an interesting question, Charlie. Being a Christian brother for now, it's like 52 years, I joined the brothers in a different era, right? The late 60s. I was right out of high school. I went to St. Ray's in Pawtucket. When I graduated, I was still 17, and I joined the brothers like 2 weeks after I graduated from high school. I turned 18 maybe a couple months later. So it's hard to even imagine that happening in this day and age, in 2019. But so I think if I reflect back over the last 52 years, a couple of things come to my mind. One of them is that, first of all, I was very, very shy. I was such an incredibly quiet kid. And I was, probably a little better than an average student. I did fairly well in school. But when I look back, I think I joined the brothers for a different reason for why I still remain a brother 52 years later. I didn't have any sense of what kind of life there was outside Pawtucket or Providence, Rhode Island, really. I led a very sheltered life, very family-centered. My parents, insisted that I get my driver's license. I still find that kind of mind-boggling that I didn't just want to get my license right away. So I kind of, my first few years as a brother, I was kind of, I was almost surprised that I enjoyed teaching as much as I did. And I kept trying new things. And I think that was an important piece. I don't think I was aware of it back, in the 70s and even early 80s. But, the move from Rhode Island to New York City was a gigantic leap when I think back on it. And then I was a teacher for a while, and all of a sudden I became an administrator of a school with 600 kids. And that seemed to work pretty well. So then that was like the vice principal. And then I became the director of a brand new school in Brooklyn. And each step along the way, I would take chances. And I do think that was a part of it. I never saw myself as a risk taker, but I guess I was, And then so when I got to the early 90s, and I had some interesting experiences in Rhode Island and New York City, San Miguel, when I look back on it, was kind of a natural next step. It's one of those things where as I got older, I started realizing, like in the 92, 93 year, my brother visitor, gave me permission to take the year off to follow my dream and try to, start a new school. I feel like being a brother has afforded me certain opportunities and experiences that if I were a layperson, you just don't have that. I didn't have to worry that year about, my next meal or who's going to pay the rent, or it was one of those things where I've been given enough freedom to try new things. And what's the worst thing that can happen? It can fail, but it's one of those things where I think having that opportunity was important. The other thing is being a part of a worldwide organization. I mean, we have brothers and Lasallians in 80 countries around the world. United States, Europe are the most obvious, but all throughout Africa, Asia, South America, Australia. I mean, there's almost no area in the world where we don't have people that are engaged in educational possibilities. So having that, it's like, and locally on the East Coast, it's having a group of people that have my back, basically, I get the support, the encouragement from this group of people. In recent years, it's become much more than only brothers having my back. It's a lot of Lasallian partners, lay colleagues who work with us who are incredibly dedicated to the mission. So I think it's that whole sense of support. I'm at the point now where I just can't. Being a brother is the most important thing in my life, really. And all of the opportunities that I've been afforded and the support that I've received throughout that journey has just been, amazing. I'm just very grateful.
You really do sound so joyful, so at peace. You've obviously referenced, brother, the sense of community and support and all. Do you have any specific goals or hopes as you continue to serve the Christian brothers going forward?
Yeah, I'm sort of at that age right now where a lot of people are, fully retired, and that's not in the cards for me right now. And the new job that I have is certainly challenging. I'm doing things that I've never done before, and it's kind of bigger picture type thing. But this experience will end, and I must admit that I'm already looking ahead. To one thing that is very appealing to me right now is a worldwide movement, kind of in a quiet way, to look at new forms of community living. So for most brothers, a community, you're living with another group of brothers. My experience the last 20 years has been living with brothers, but also Lasallian volunteers, men and women, who are younger and they're committed to the mission. But looking forward, I'm looking at even new types of community that are different from that. It might be, and there are certain areas of our district where the time is ripe. It's like Rhode Island, Philadelphia, Washington, just to name three, where people, some of our partners are looking for experiences of community where there are brothers, there are Lasallian volunteers, and maybe there's some of our lay colleagues who are part of a community where people pray together, we eat meals together, we do service together, and all of this is to support the mission. So it's kind of energizing a lot of the people that are presently working in some of our ministries, mostly serving youth. And this is another way to support that and to encourage other people who are not brothers to be a part of it. And I could see myself being a part of something like that for, many more years, really. And it's kind of exciting. It's kind of exciting to see some of those possibilities.
And Francisco, now in your mission as a student, research has been quite prominent to you. I know last academic year you were a research student of Dr. Kara Sabulko, who's an associate professor of sociology and global studies here. That experience, from what I understand from you, it appeared to ignite a research passion in you. Tell us about the research that you did first with Dr. Sabulko, and was it a springboard for you in other ways?
Yeah. I really think that the experience with her, working on her research, which basically is about undocumented Brazilians in Massachusetts, kind of led me to realize kind of how important research and the interview process can be. So I think it was halfway through the semester with working with Dr. Sabulko, I realized, wait, I actually want to do something my like area of interest, and my area of interest has always been language. And I know I've said I did a lot of translating because I'm fluent in English and Spanish. I realized how influential language can be in our lives. So I was doing a little bit of research, looking up articles about the importance of language, and I stumbled upon this one article that said that basically just because you're bilingual in Spanish doesn't necessarily mean that you earn more money, because I had always assumed that bilingual people could get more jobs, things like that. So, and these articles kind of were debunking those ideas that just because you're bilingual doesn't mean that you get more jobs and things like that. It turns out that if you're black or brown or you speak Spanish, you might actually make less than English monolingual. So I was like, what? That's insane. So I started thinking about it more and more, and I realized that maybe we should look at language not only in the monetary sense, in the economic sense. Maybe we should look at language from kind of the identity sense. How does language impact us or primarily like people who are Hispanic, Latino, people who might speak other languages. Although my research focuses mostly on Latinos, I think that, language is an important part of our understanding of our reality. So I think doing that research will help me better understand kind of my identity too, as a bilingual person living in the United States. So I think that's where that stemmed from.
Excellent. Was research much in your mindset, Francisco, when you came to PC? I mean, has this opportunity changed you or made you think differently at all?
No, I knew that at some point I might have to do research, because sociology kind of has that within its framework is having an area of interest and then researching it, and then either continue to research or become like an activist for that area. And I had always had a fascination with sociology because of being an immigrant, being bilingual, and all those things. So I realized that, our worlds are all different depending on our experiences. But I never thought that I was going to be doing research to this capacity. So it's very interesting to see me starting off thinking like, well, I don't know what I want to do, to now I'm sociology major with the Latin American studies minor, and I'm doing research. And then in the future, I could end up anywhere. But
you gave us a little bit of a hint, but what do you think ultimately you'd like to have done or have accomplished through your research? Do you want to get published? What ultimately is your goal here?
I think the biggest goal would be getting it published, but if not, I think I'd use it as a writing sample for grad school that I'm thinking about applying to, because I for sure either want a master's degree in sociology or some kind of area that sociology applies to, so it could either be like human resources or other kind of areas. So I think that's what I want to use it for, but if it does get published, I think that would be great. I'm not sure if it's worthy of that much acclaim, but we'll see.
Great. Yeah. You made a brief reference there to grad school. Mm-hmm. You're not too far away from finishing up your degree here.
No.
So what's on the horizon for you? And do you have any, I'll say, career thoughts at this point?
Yeah, so originally I had thought about jumping right into grad school after I graduated here. But I realized maybe I need a little break. Maybe I need to go back, like kind of what I did after high school, take a kind of like a gap year. So I was thinking of working 1 or 2 years in an area kind of a little bit outside of my realm of expertise, maybe something in the business world or something else, getting some experience to see if maybe other areas interest me more. And then after those 1 or 2 years, going to grad school and getting a master's for sure.
Francisco and brother, thank you so much for really a wonderful three-way conversation here and for being our guest today.
Of course, thank you.
And thanks to you, our listeners, for joining us on the Providence College Podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast in all the usual places: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube. Thanks again to our producer, Chris Judge. I'm Charlie Joyce. Until next time.